You look around and it feels like everyone is moving faster than you. Friends buying houses, colleagues upgrading lifestyles, people your age investing, traveling, expanding. And you think, quietly, why am I not there yet? But here's the part you don't see when you compare timelines. Not everyone is carrying the same weight. Some people are building forward, others are building forward while holding things up behind them. Maybe you send money home every month. Maybe you help your parents more than anyone knows. Maybe you're the one who never lets the family emergency escalate. Maybe you stayed in a stable job instead of chasing risk because someone depends on your consistency. From the outside, it looks like you're growing slower, but inside, you're stabilizing more. There's a difference. When you carry responsibility for more than just yourself, your financial decisions change. You don't optimize for speed, you optimize for safety. You don't swing big, you build steady. And steady doesn't look impressive on social media. It looks ordinary, but ordinary can be heavy. Here's the truth most comparison ignores. If two people earn the same income, but one of them supports 3 additional people emotionally or financially, their trajectories won't look the same. Not because one is behind, but because one is carrying weight the other doesn't have. And when you compare growth without comparing load, you'll always feel late. Stay with me, because what feels like falling behind might actually be strength misinterpreted as slowness. And once you see the difference, the timeline changes meaning. There's always one person in every family who becomes the stable one, the one who doesn't panic, the one who figures things out, the one who answers the late-night call. Sometimes that person is you. You're not reckless with money, not because you're overly cautious, but because someone depends on your consistency. A younger sibling, aging parents, a partner between jobs, a family situation that never fully stabilized. So while others take risks, relocate, invest aggressively, switch careers, you calculate differently, not out of fear, but out of responsibility. When your decisions affect only you, you can afford volatility. When your decisions affect others, you choose durability. And durability grows slower. If someone earning $6,200 per month keeps $2,000 flexible, they can invest boldly. But if $1,100 of that goes toward helping family, the trajectory changes, not dramatically, but measurably. You're not falling behind, you're redistributing capacity. And that redistribution rarely gets applause. No one posts about sending money home. No one celebrates staying in a stable job so others can sleep peacefully. No one congratulates you for absorbing financial tension quietly. But absorbing tension is work. And when you're the one holding stability for others, growth looks different. It looks slower. It looks less flashy. It looks late. But late compared to what? Compared to people who aren't carrying what you are. And that difference matters more than you think. Let's imagine 2 people. Both are 34 years old. Both earn $75,000 per year. Both are disciplined, responsible, intelligent. Person A invests $1,800 per month. Person B invests $900. On paper, person A is ahead. But here's what the spreadsheet doesn't show. Person B pays $600 monthly toward family support, covers $250 in recurring medical expenses for a parent, keeps extra cash liquid because emergencies aren't hypothetical, they're predictable. Over 5 years, Person A builds roughly $108,000 in investments. Person B builds $54,000. That looks like underperformance, but if Person B had the same freedom as Person A, the numbers would be identical. The difference isn't discipline, it's load. Growth under load is still growth. In fact, it's often more sustainable because the person carrying more develops patience, resilience, long-term thinking. And here's something most people miss. When your obligations decrease later in life, when siblings stabilize, when parents need less, when children grow independent, your capacity expands dramatically. But your financial habits remain conservative, strong, grounded. That's when acceleration happens, not because you suddenly became smarter, but because the weight shifted.
So if you're comparing your timeline to someone whose only responsibility is themselves, you're comparing two completely different equations. And equations with different variables produce different outcomes. That's not failure, that's math. The hardest part isn't the responsibility, it's the comparison. You scroll, you attend events, you listen to conversations about investments, properties, travel, business risks, and part of you thinks, I should be further by now. But further according to whose context? Most success timelines assume individual load. They assume no financial dependence, no cultural expectations to help family, no inherited instability to buffer against. They assume freedom. And when you're building while carrying others, your timeline stretches, not because you lack ambition, but because you prioritize stability over speed. There's also something else. When you're the stable one, you don't talk about the weight. You don't announce what you cover. You don't list what you absorb. So from the outside, it looks like everyone else is simply moving faster. But you're not slow. You're distributing strength. And distribution doesn't look like acceleration. It looks like steadiness. The danger is internalizing slowness as inadequacy. But it's not inadequacy, it's allocation. If you ever feel like you're late to your own life, pause and ask one question. Am I actually behind, or am I just carrying more than they are? Because those are two completely different realities, and understanding the difference changes how you measure yourself entirely. There's a specific kind of fatigue that doesn't come from working long hours. It comes from being the one who can't afford to collapse. When you're the stable one, you don't get to experiment recklessly. You don't get to see what happens. You don't get to quit impulsively or pivot dramatically, because if you wobble, others feel it. So you stay steady. You choose the safer option. You delay the risk. You say, not yet. And over time, that steadiness becomes your identity. People describe you as responsible, grounded, dependable, strong. But strength under constant load is heavy. You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because you've been load-bearing for years. Financially, this shows up in subtle ways. You keep larger emergency funds than your peers. You avoid aggressive investments. You hesitate before career jumps, not because you lack ambition, but because your decisions have external impact. And here's the emotional part nobody talks about. Sometimes you don't even resent the responsibility. You resent that it makes you look slow. Because from the outside, your caution reads as hesitation. Your stability reads as lack of growth. Your patience reads as delay. But growth under responsibility is quieter. It doesn't spike. It compounds slowly. And slow compounding rarely gets applause. But it builds foundations that don't crack under pressure.
Here's something important. Weight shifts. Children grow, parents stabilize or require less, siblings become independent, situations resolve. And when they do, something strange happens. You don't immediately accelerate. Because you've been calibrated to carry. Your nervous system got used to responsibility. Your financial behavior was shaped around protection, not expansion. So when capacity increases, you don't suddenly spend wildly or take extreme risks. You pause, you double-check, you move carefully. And this is where comparison becomes misleading again. Someone who never carried weight may already be scaling aggressively. But when your load decreases, your baseline strength is different. You've built discipline, you've built resilience, you've built systems that survived constraint. And systems built under constraint scale powerfully when constraint loosens. Here's the part most people miss. The person who carried more early often accelerates later, not because they suddenly changed, but because the weight is no longer compressing growth. And when that moment comes, your progress won't look dramatic. It will look controlled, intentional, grounded. Because you didn't build on freedom, you built on responsibility. And responsibility, when it no longer weighs you down, becomes leverage. Let's correct something clearly. You were never behind. You were calculating differently.
Behind assumes equal conditions. Behind assumes equal risk tolerance, equal obligations, equal emotional bandwidth. But you weren't operating under equal conditions. You were building while buffering. You were saving while supporting. You were growing while stabilizing others. That doesn't make you late. It makes you layered. And here's the subtle shift that changes everything. When you stop comparing timelines and start comparing loads, the narrative flips. Instead of asking, "Why am I not further?" you start asking, "How much did I carry while still moving?" That question restores dignity, because movement under weight is harder than movement in freedom. Two people walking at the same pace are not doing the same work if one is carrying 30 extra pounds, and financial life works the same way. You didn't move slower because you lacked ambition. You moved intentionally because you understood consequence. That's not weakness, that's maturity. And maturity rarely feels fast, but it lasts. If this resonates, stay with me, because what we need to talk about next isn't just weight, it's how to measure progress differently when you've been carrying more than most. Here's what makes invisible weight so dangerous. After a while, even you forget you're carrying it. Helping your parents becomes normal. Covering family emergencies becomes routine. Being the stable one becomes expected. And when something becomes expected, it stops being acknowledged. So you compare yourself to someone who never carried what you carried, and you don't adjust the equation. You just conclude you're slower. But imagine two people climbing the same mountain. One climbs with a light backpack, the other climbs with extra weight, quietly, without announcing it. If they reach different heights at the same time, is one behind, or did one simply carry more? This is where identity quietly fractures, because you don't resent helping, you don't resent being responsible, you resent that no one factors it in when measuring progress. And eventually, you stop factoring it in too. You measure yourself against speed, not load. But load matters. Load changes pacing. Load changes risk tolerance. And when the weight finally lessens, even slightly, something else happens. You don't know how to move without it. Because you've built identity around carrying. And that's the moment you need a new definition of progress, a new way to measure what ahead actually means. Let's redefine something carefully. Ahead isn't whoever earns more. Ahead isn't whoever scales faster. Ahead isn't whoever looks freer on social media. Ahead is whoever builds something sustainable under their real conditions. If your real condition included responsibility for others, your pace will naturally look different, but different doesn't mean deficient. There are people who sprint early and burn out. There are people who grow aggressively and collapse under pressure. There are people who look advanced financially, but are one disruption away from instability. You, on the other hand, built while protecting. You built while buffering. You built while carrying. That creates a different kind of foundation. And here's the truth most comparison ignores. Once the weight shifts, the person who learned to build under constraint often moves with extraordinary stability. Not flashy, not reckless, stable. And stability compounds. You weren't behind, you were strengthening. You weren't late, you were layered. And layered growth doesn't always look dramatic, but it lasts. The real danger isn't that you grew slower. The real danger is believing the wrong story about why. Because once you believe you're behind, you start making decisions from panic instead of alignment, and panic never builds well. Here's what I want you to hear clearly. You were never late. You were building with more weight than most people could see. And if your life feels slower, heavier, more deliberate, it's not because you lack discipline. It's because you carried responsibility that doesn't show up on spreadsheets. There's no financial statement line for helped family, no balance sheet category for protected stability, no performance metric for chose caution because others depended on me. But those choices shape architecture, and architecture decides how strong something becomes over time. This channel isn't about hustle narratives or shame-based comparison. It's about understanding the invisible structures shaping your pace. Because once you understand what you are actually carrying, something shifts. You stop rushing. You stop apologizing for your timeline. You stop competing with people who ran a different race entirely. If this video helped you see your story differently, subscribe, not for pressure, but for perspective. Because clarity removes unnecessary shame. And once shame disappears, your decisions become calmer, cleaner, stronger. You're not behind, you are carrying. And now that you see it clearly, you get to decide how much weight you keep and how much you finally put down.